And we're broadcasting. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth episode of the OBANZ community call. So I just wanted to say a warm welcome to everyone who's tuning in, and also what I found from the analytics from previous calls is that a lot of people actually watch this after the event. So to everyone who's watching it after the event, hi. I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Joyce Seitzinger. I'm at Cat's Pajamas in Dead on Twitter, and I'm an education technologist. I've worked in higher education, and I'm currently running my own company called Academic Tribe. And today we've got with us Bronwyn Steffi. Bron, do you want to just introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm a consultant researcher in games, community, and learning, and very interested in badges and open badges.
Okay, thanks. And today we've got a case study hangout. So the other person in the hangout with us is Tim Klapdor from Charles Sturt University. Tim, do you just want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, so my name is Tim Klapdor. I'm the Innovation Technology Officer at Charles Sturt University, and working with a group on implementing badges at CSU. So yeah, so I put together a little presentation on the work that we've been doing and some of the things we've learned out of that process.
All right, great. I'm really looking forward to it because Tim and I have been talking a little bit about his project, and it sounds like they've made a few changes and things along the way. So I'll be really interested to hear that journey. And also in the room with us is Natalie. Natalie, who's at Noodle Muse on Twitter. So I always think of her as at Noodle Muse. Nat, do you just want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi everybody, Natalie, or Moodle Muse is fine. I'm interested in all things educational and technology with a focus on gamification, how we can increase engagement and motivation by recognising that everybody responds to different techniques and borrowing ideas from great game designers and how to really make the whole process as enjoyable as it can be and is for some of us.
All right, great. The other people who were supposed to be on this call was Dean Groom, who usually facilitates this with us, but unfortunately he couldn't make it tonight. He might be jumping in later. And also, I'm still waiting to invite Dan Bowen. Dan, if you are in the room, then do give me a wave. So just a little bit to introduce this call, a little bit of intro that I do at the beginning of every single one, just so that everybody knows how we work. So this is an Open Badges call, and it is a community call. It is modeled after the Open Badges calls that the Mozilla Foundation ran for the Open Badges community, and in fact that is now being run by the Badge Alliance, because the Badge Alliance has kind of taken over the Open Badges project from Mozilla Foundation. Anyway, we're modeling it in their way, in that there are a few people on the call who are actually doing all the talking, but everybody can be joining in via a back channel, and that back channel you can find on the Etherpad. Now, I tweeted that link earlier. So if you go to the Twitter handle OB_ANZ, you will find that, or you can also find it by just looking in my Twitter stream if you're connected to me on Twitter. And we've also tried to put it in the showcase, so you might be able to get it in the showcase, but this is a new feature that Google has only just launched. So you should be able to click on that link, and then you should be able. It should take you to the Etherpad. But I just want to, I'm a little bit dodgy about using it because Google only literally rolled it out this week. So in the meantime, we're going to continue using the Etherpad to really be capturing any kind of thinking that we do, any kind of talk. So the Etherpad is an interesting little piece of technology because it's like collaborative writing, but basically it allows us to have a chat, an active chat that everybody can be typing into and be back channeling on. But it also allows us to do this writing. And when you go into the Etherpad, it actually allows you to, you're assigned a color. So what we like everyone to do is when you get logged into the Etherpad is just to go to the top right-hand corner and click on the largest little square, the largest color square that's right at the top there, and you should be able to change your name, and that means that we can see who's writing what. And the other thing that we then like everyone to do who's in the room or who's listening in is to actually, you'll see on line 31, so this is one of the great things about Etherpad, the fact that it numbers all of these lines, is on line 31 you can see that the roll call starts, and we just like everyone to share a little bit of information about them so that we can all follow up with each other after the call. But remember that that is a completely open web page, so don't go putting anything in there that you don't want to share with the whole wide world. All right, now if you scroll down from that, you'll see that we've got the rest of the agenda. So the way that we run the OBANZ community calls, and this is an evolving community, so you know, this can change from moment to moment, but currently what we're doing is we are running 2 community calls a month, one on the first and one on the third Wednesday of the month, and you will all say, but this is not the third Wednesday of the month, and you'd be right. We're starting the first and third Wednesdays from next week, so in fact there will be another OBANZ call next week. And the way that we run it is that the first OBANZ call of the week is a generic kind of call, open space we've decided to call it, and anybody can basically put in a you know, a topic that they want to talk about, or a question that they've got. And the third, the one that's on the third Wednesday of the month, is more of a case study. So we try to get people who are working on a project, or maybe someone who's deciding or who wants to start a project, or maybe a few people who all have the same questions, and then we get them together to actually examine just that one thing. So those are more focused, whereas the ones that we do on the first Wednesday are more of an open space kind of, let's just talk about things that we want to talk about. So the way that we like to use these this Etherpad is to really do collaborative note-taking. So feel free to just jump in there and add, you know, any notes as the presenter is speaking, or as questions are asked. It's really, really good to be capturing the questions as well, so that we can follow up with those. And just in case, while we're talking, you've got ideas or topics for other for future OBANZ calls, you'll see that at the bottom we've just listed when the upcoming OBANZ calls is, and there's also a space there for you to add any speaker or topic that you want to add. All right, so that's just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm really lucky to have Bron Stuckey with us, who's an expert community facilitator. And so while Tim is doing his presentation, and we've asked him to keep it just short because we really want to kind of have the conversation with all of you as well. But while Tim is talking, Bron is going to kind of be taking the lead on the collaborative note taking. So so just take the lead from her, and feel free to add what you need to in the Etherpad. All right, now let me
Joyce, just before we jump over, I just noticed a group of people have just made their way over to the Mopad, and then we just need to remind you, at the very top you'll see a larger square coloured block and then a space for you to put your name in. You won't then be listed as unnamed. So we've got 3 people who've just made their way over, but they might have missed the instruction about making sure they change their name so we can identify you, and if needs be, share any information with you down the track. We also have an apology from Colin Warren, who said he was hoping to join us tonight, but it hasn't worked out for him, and sends his best wishes, and we'll catch up with the recording.
Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, Colin's been very supportive, and he was quite active in the first few calls as well. So it would be great to have him on, and maybe even to get him on as a speaker at some point. Yes, just to reiterate those instructions from Bron, make sure that you do go into the Etherpad and then click next to the topmost square. It's an awkward instruction to give, but the topmost square, and then you'll be able to type your name in there, and that will assign the color to your name. All right, so with that, I'm going to give it over to Tim from Charles Sturt University. I'm just going to mute my mic, Tim, so that, you know, you don't get disturbed by the cats running behind me and stuff. But yeah, if as questions pop up in the chat, Bron or myself might jump in and just interrupt you every once in a while. If not, you go for it. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, thanks.
Okay, everyone. Well, thanks to Joyce and everyone for inviting me to speak. I'm really kind of doing this on behalf of a broader operations group. A lot of the badge work has been done by a broad group of people, and leading that group has been Jonathan Howard and Amanda Tarbett, and really the work that's been done has been driven by those people. So I'll just click over to slides, and hopefully you can see that. So I've kind of titled the presentation, "We're going to need a bigger boat," because I think badges, while they're quite simplistic, once you kind of get into the nitty-gritty about trying to implement them, you kind of realize that there's a bit more to it than what meets the eye. So just a kind of introduction to Charles Sturt University. We tend to do things like technology implementations and to scale. Really, we don't do a lot of kind of small-scale innovations, you know, within a course or within a faculty or within a school. Most of what we do is we try and attempt that to kind of be scaled up across the institution. And I mean, one of the main reasons for this is we have really dispersed campuses right across New South Wales and in Canada, and I think there's a campus now in Victoria as well, which means that not only are there dispersed campuses, there's dispersed students and dispersed staff. So what we really tend to do is focus on things that can be centralized and scalable. So badging really comes into it, and it's trying to fit it into that mold. So initially we kind of came up against around our investigations into badges and found that there were some issues around badging on a small scale. When people go out and do those small-scale innovations, there's actually kind of some negatives to doing it. One of them is this idea of carpet bombing, where people tend to give a badge for pretty much anything and everything, which really dilutes the value of those badges and what they actually mean and what they can stand for in the context of learning and teaching in particular. The other thing that tends to happen is that there's a fair amount of repetition. People replicate badges and they offer the same thing. But also when there is that repetition, there's a lot of inconsistency. So people give out a badge to signify something, but someone else might give something similar, but the requirements to meet that are quite different. So when we started doing this work at CSU, we were really coming in to the big picture and looking at it from that perspective. So what we wanted to do was try and fit it into the model at CSU, and the first thing to do was try and work out how does this fit. And the kind of main thing that we came into it was trying to not duplicate things that we already do. We already give out degrees, we already give out marks for certain assessment tasks, so we don't necessarily need to duplicate those and give them badges. What we wanted to try and do was unearth the things that aren't actually recognized at the moment. We also needed to cater for our needs, and the big need at a CSU, particularly at the enterprise level, is diversity. So we teach everything from vet science through to photography and 3D animation. There's a lot of depth and difference between our faculties and schools, and so we needed something that can actually cope with that diversity. And we really needed to kind of uncover what badges offer, and I think one of the really kind of key things is that they're a way that we can actually start to visualize the depth and diversity of learning. They can be used to kind of uncover things that aren't kind of talked about explicitly within the systems that we have around marks and you know, accreditation and degrees and things like that. So in the big picture, you know, assessment actually allows us to add some meaning to assessment tasks so that it can it might be an essay for ease of marking or for a specific purpose about testing students' writing skills, but what they write about might actually have greater meaning in terms of the practice that they go out after they've graduated. It provides a context to practice that doing badging for things like practical elements, we can actually kind of specify what the students have gone out and done, so that for an employer's sake that there's a bit of context wrapped around to the fact that they've done prac, not that they've just done it, it's what they've done it in. And it allows us to kind of add another layer of depth to competency. So rather than just thinking about competency as a kind of binary thing, we can add more layers to it and show how students have accomplished, but also maybe how they've moved through a series of tasks to get to a level of competency. So when we really kind of got into this, what we really discovered was that badges need a framework. We can't just kind of go in there and do things. So we've really been working quite a bit on establishing that framework and what that actually means. So the first kind of element is defining hierarchy of badges. So actually associating value around the badge and showing, because that there's multiple levels to badges, that there's various things that we can issue them for, and what we need to do is kind of make sure that we clearly articulate what the hierarchy is, because if we're giving someone that a badge for, say, 3 years worth of work, it has to be different to something that only takes 3 weeks or 3 hours to do. So we really need that defined hierarchy. The other thing was about defining what the audience was, and this is really talking about purpose. And this comes back for CSU about that idea of visualizing the learning and bringing things to the fore that aren't necessarily recognized. But in other areas and other industries and schools and the vet sector, that purpose might be completely different, in that it's more about explicitly being able to demonstrate to an employer that a student has completed something. Defining the connection. So I think badges have a really important part in developing up a sense of meaning around some of the things in education that aren't necessarily apparent to some people. So badges provide us a way to kind of join some of these dots in between, a student graduating the assignments that they do. What does that actually mean for an employer and for the student that an employer might be looking at? And maybe not just employer kind of ways, but also just in terms of academic credentials and things like that. And the other thing is defining the design, and this is really about providing a kind of consistency with the look and the feel of badges, so that from an outside perspective, they actually can understand the system that the institution's employing to deliver badges, and it should be recognizable what the badges mean, and also that idea about the hierarchy, quite clear where on the hierarchy that certain badge kind of lives, rather than just depending on the metadata to define that the design should really kind of start to pick some of those elements up. So yeah, the 4 kind of key bits about developing up that framework is about defining the value, the purpose, the meaning, and getting some consistency through the whole thing. So in terms of what CSU is doing, what we're doing is running a pilot throughout this session. We're involving the course directors, who aren't necessarily the people that teach the course directly, but oversee the entire kind of degree program. But we also have people that are teaching and are actually involved in the day-to-day running of those courses and subjects. We've got representatives from all 4 faculties at CSU, so science, business, education, and arts. And really what we're trying to do is, what does it take to develop a badge within the context that suits those individual practitioners, and also just the process of how do we actually do it. So the badge trials, we're really looking at pushing through some badge trials this session, and really trying out a variety of different things so that we can actually come back with some recommendations for the university on how to take this to the next level. So a couple of areas that we're concentrating on. One is capturing demonstrated skills. So not necessarily the thing that gets marked, which might be more about content, but maybe the skills that are exhibited to get to that point. We're looking at uncovering some of those learning that actually takes place across multiple subjects or within a course, rather than the degree itself, but some of the things that actually happen within the broader context, which isn't necessarily uncovered. And also looking at ways that we can define things around specialization, and also looking at partnerships as well, and how to kind of visualize some of those things to give them more context. So badges kind of work in a way to kind of complement the knowledge that we're doing in higher education. They're a good way of displaying some of the idea about accumulated learning. So not just, here's the thing I did, but showing a pathway of I got here and then I did this and I got to here. So you can actually see kind of levels and hierarchy. I think it actually allows us to add clarity to education, because a lot of it's kind of mystic kind of connotations to what actually happens in the classroom. Badges actually allow us to really kind of clarify some of those things and put it into a sense that people can actually understand. And there's also the idea that they can actually show contributions of cooperative and collaborative environments. So what did people do? How did they work together? Which is, I think, one of those things that's quite difficult to do in a traditional academic sense. So where we're at the moment is really looking at designing the badges. So we're working with our marketing team to put together some mock-ups of the badges, but really aligning those to that framework that we've been developing as well. So at the moment, this is a kind of quick preview of what that looks like. So we've kind of got we're looking at using different colors and shapes to define different areas and different badge types. So we've kind of got some staff development stuff there, some things around skills, and then one that's kind of looking at the partnership component of one of the subjects. And so that's kind of the basic gist, and there's a lot more depth that we can add to that, like looking at the different skills that people can present with and the levels and things. So we're still working through that idea about designing in the consistency and really kind of making that visualized in terms of what does the badge actually mean. In terms of the technology, fairly early on we kind of realized that the learning management system is really, while a lot of them are kind of switching to this model of being able to offer badges, what you're actually kind of doing is limiting to the stuff that actually happens within the LMS. And for a lot of teaching and learning practice, that's already captured by things like marks. So when we started looking at this, what we're actually trying to do is capture things that aren't taking place in the LMS. So for that reason, we're looking at trialing the Mozilla BadgeKit software, which is kind of, for us, stepping into a bit of an unknown because the software is still in beta. There's a bit of an unfamiliar backend in terms of what our IT staff are used to dealing with. So there's a few unknowns in that space, and so we are kind of, quite trepidatious in looking at how that'll actually work and whether it is something that we will stick with. But we are kind of just looking at, for the time being, using it as the provisioning tool for us, and then which will allow students to kind of access the badges that we provision, and for us to essentially manage and issue those badges. So really, from my perspective, coming into this badges has meant that there's actually more beneath the surface than kind of first appears. Badges seem like quite a simple concept and idea, but once you kind of dig away a little bit, it's actually quite interesting to see how it can impact and the kinds of impact that it could actually have on education into the future. In particular, once we kind of reach that critical mass of uptake in people outside. So things like LinkedIn and those kind of profiling tools and employers looking for specific skill sets. I think once badges kind of hits that level, it'll be kind of really be a bit of a game changer. So I think it's kind of interesting to be in on badges at that kind of very early level. So the kind of advice from the work that we've been doing is really kind of look at getting a bigger boat, because it's probably a little bit more complex than first seems. So that's the presentation side of things.
Oh, all right, and I'm back. Sorry, I didn't want to distract everyone while you were speaking. That's wonderful, and by the way, lots of compliments from people for your slides. And I was just saying how you showed me that they're all done in Markdown, and that I've forgotten how to do it. So I think you'll have to put up a blog post. This is just an aside. You'll have to put up a blog post about how you made your slides in Markdown. So, but yeah, really, really interesting, and I think particularly interesting that the fact that rather than going smaller with your pilot, you've actually decided to scale up. That's a brave move, but it also means maybe more buy-in and that you have to find across the institution. So I think really, really interesting. Now there was a question from Wayne McIntosh from OERU, who's in the chat, and he says, how does CSU envisage using open badges to map to formal unique credit? We're assuming that you see it as part of a framework, and are there possibilities for certification option for OERU?
I don't think we're kind of looking at doubling up on formal accreditation at the moment. I think what we're really focusing on is the things that we don't see. So things like specialization is quite an interesting one, because quite often students will graduate with a degree which is quite generic. But it's quite difficult to kind of demonstrate that I did a whole bunch of other things, because the subjects aren't actually called that. The assessment tasks that use those aren't necessarily the standard. It's just a question where you've gone off and done a research thing. So I kind of think that the formalization thing is not necessarily something where we're looking at continuing. But it is about trying to recognise those pathways as well, and I think that's something that we haven't necessarily gone too deep into within the pilots and the work done so far. But in terms of those learning pathways and getting accreditation, it is something that we're interested in. But I kind of think there's a whole bunch of worms that you're kind of unpacking once you start getting into trying to recognise all those prior learning things. CSU already has quite a robust system for that. I think quite a lot of our students come through the TAFE system and then end up at CSU to get their degree and that formal qualification. So we've got the mechanisms already in place. I think badges will provide a different way of recognising it, and one that's probably a little bit more user-friendly from a student's perspective. So I think in the longer term we might move down that way, but I think at the moment we're really just trying to look at recognising the stuff that we do that isn't necessarily getting captured at the moment.
Yeah. Can I just jump in on that, Joyce?
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the cases I'm looking at in terms of gamification has gone on a similar route. So they left grading and the academic assessment over to one side, and they're looking at a gamified whole undergraduate degree. But what they did was, and I thought this was really brilliant, was looked at the habits of highly effective students in that particular field, and in this case it's games and interactive design. But I think that's similar to what Tim's saying, is there are other things that are happening, there are other things we're requiring students to do as learners and as people moving into the practice that they're going to work in. And I think actually concentrating on those things really frees us up to really do something deeper than just taking a 75 or an A+ and making it the Atta Girl badge. So I think what Tim's describing is really deeper quality look at what learning involves.
Yeah, and you see, I'm really interested with the badges in terms of them being able to separate the learning experience from the achievements. So people being able to gain the badges and show certain skills or achieve or knowledge without having necessarily gone to all the lectures and done all the exercises, but they've achieved a particular assessment or they've achieved a particular task. So so that's interesting, because currently you're looking at it for the placement, right, Tim? And you're looking for it very much for things that are not directly related to things that you already do. So they're almost like facilitating external processes. Am I right?
Yeah, there's a bit of effort around and those kind of areas, because they're just things that aren't getting captured at the moment, but they're things that actually have value to employers and for students. Being able to kind of describe those things is really important, which a degree doesn't and a transcript doesn't necessarily say. It might have some subject names in there, but even then, most of the time they're quite vague, because academics don't want to tie themselves down too much to teaching one particular curriculum. So yeah, I think we're really looking at trying to uncover in our initial sets of trials. But I think that'll change quite as well, a bit as well, in terms of once we start broadening the scope and the number of users and where those backgrounds are. That diversity thing then starts to kick in, and different schools are going to want different things out of badges. So I think we've got a fairly robust framework, but I think it's something that's also adaptable, and it's not going to be written in stone as well. So I suppose that's part of the process.
All right. Now I've just brought Wayne in from the Etherpad because he had some questions for you that he was trying to put in the chat, and I thought maybe it's just easier if he just comes in here and asks them. So Wayne, you might still be getting set up. Oh, there he is. I'm not hearing you at the moment.
Just a reminder while Wayne's getting his audio fixed up, I'm taking notes and I'd love you to help me with that in the Etherpad. So if you see I've missed out, jump in and qualify things, add things, and most certainly drop your questions in there, and we'll make sure they get fed to Tim and answered in the session.
I'm not sure how Wayne's getting on, but maybe Natalie, what was your reaction listening to See As Used project?
Sounds fantastic. I'd love to be there, seeing what your amazing team is achieving, Tim. I've got a whole list of questions here, but I'll try not to take up the rest of the time with them. Did you consider Credly?
I think we looked at a few different platforms, but we were really kind of keen to look at the open side of things. So a platform that we could incorporate into other things in the longer term. I mean, at the moment, this is part of the pilot, is to actually test the platform. If BadgeKit doesn't necessarily work out, it might be that we're looking for other things. But yeah, so I don't want to preempt and say that this is the only thing that we're going to look at or concentrate on. But yeah, it's the thing we're going to run the trials through at the moment because it seems the best fit. But other options are definitely kind of things that are on the table as well.
I teach at TAFE, so I have a lot of these students that haven't yet come to you. And let me warn you what their email addresses look like. They've come to me from high school, and if you've seen some of the names of personal email addresses, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So at some point in time, I've got to tie my students down and say, now this is what a professional email address looks like. And it doesn't belong to your local ISP, and it doesn't have any naughty words in it. And this is what you're going to show to your potential employers and communicate with them, which takes me a good few hours to get past that seemingly simple hurdle. And it's a big thing to say, what name do you want to have for the rest of your life as your personal email address? So after they've been with me, they get a TAFE email address, which they pretty much ignore. Their casual email address, then they've got this more professional email address, and now you're going to give them a Charles Sturt email address. So for me, starting to use badges, I'm realizing that this issue of multiple email addresses being and open badges being attached to one through the open badges system at the moment, and Credly does offer multiple email addresses, and I've put some links in the Etherpad to my research I've been doing around that. So I'm wondering, have you come across this issue and thought through it?
We haven't kind of addressed the student side of things directly as such. I mean, the idea is that at the moment the kind of backpack system will run that, and it does do some kind of identity management around that. I think we're kind of at the moment looking at hoping that some of the kind of industry partners will kind of turn up. I think LinkedIn is kind of one of those ones where if they kind of sign up, it becomes a quasi-standard that quite a few other people will do. But I mean, that aside, I think there's some issues around identity online, and I don't think that anyone's really kind of sorted that out. I think things like Mozilla's Persona, where you can link a whole bunch of different things, is interesting. But yeah, I don't the transferability of badges is going to be an interesting kind of thing into the future. I don't know if anyone's kind of thought that far ahead at the moment. I think it's just trying to get up and running to begin with.
Yeah, I think I made a cheeky comment on one of our Google Plus posts a few weeks ago about that, with you putting up your website to create a digital identity for yourself. And I was trying to organise a Google Hangout with David Drinkle in Brisbane, and I have 4 active Google accounts, and he has 4 active Google accounts. So we actually had to try to Google Hangout with the right version of ourselves, because they're similar profile pics and similar names. And we both laughed at how many versions of ourselves exist out there, and we don't want to merge them, because one's with us, a school that we work with, one's our personal one, one's a client that we have a lot to do with, so we're admins on their account. And it made me realise that we're moving into a world where we don't want to have one online identity. We want to belong to different communities and have different roles within those communities. Not that I change who I am, but the roles and the rights and responsibilities that I have will change. And I'm wondering if students are going to be facing that in their future too. So it's a big question in my mind about digital certification and community identities and multiple identities.
I don't know if we've got an answer. I think I've probably just got as many questions. I mean, I think there's some really interesting stuff going on in the indie web kind of area, which is looking at trying to reclaim people's identities and the systems that they use. So they've done some interesting work on kind of opening up things like that, so that you go and set up your own domain, and then you can log into a whole bunch of services using that domain to authenticate via. So I think there's some kind of interesting stuff coming out of the works. Yeah, I don't think there's any answers to any of those. I think there's probably just more issues, but I suppose for people that are looking for businesses, look for problems, and that's how you can make some money.
Jump in, Wayne.
Yeah, Wayne, are you with us and able to come into the conversation?
Yes, I'm here. I don't have my video feed on because I'm kind of sort of in rural New Zealand, where our bandwidth uploads are a bit of given latencies. So if you don't find out, I don't have my video feed on. I mean, I don't have any specific questions for Tim, other than just say well, what an awesome set of slides, Tim. I mean, it's great to see the talent in action. Really quite impressive. So I mean, obviously the whole issue of formal credentialing is a key area of interest for the OERU collaboration, and of course CSU is one of the founding anchor partners of the OERU. And so one of the big challenges that we are grappling with, we have a specific working group that is looking at the whole issue of credit transfer and course articulation within our global network. And of course, one of the items that is on the agenda is the whole question of open badging. And if you think about it at one level, the open badge infrastructure is really just a digital manifestation of transcript credit. We've got the digital infrastructure to look at what competencies have been evaluated, who the assessors were, and all the rest of it. But the group is in two minds, obviously, because one of the key challenges, and we've referred to this now around sort of the email identities, is the student validation issue. I mean, how do we assess that the person, the email address is the person who actually did the work? But I mean, I think there are some legacy solutions that we could use to progress that agenda. Even if it goes to sort of proctored, photo validation and all the rest. I mean, I don't think that's an insurmountable problem. The interesting bit of this equation is we've been using open badging in the Wiki Educator community for quite some time now, and with all our open courses, we actually run evaluation surveys where we ask the learners what they would actually like. If we were to offer formal certification that would carry credit towards universities, which of the following options would you prefer? Kind of a digital badge, a printed certificate, or transcript credit. And interesting, offhand, I don't have the statistics with me, but only around 17 to 20% of the learners actually want a digital badge. They far prefer the printed PDF certificate. So, I mean, it's an interesting perception challenge. I mean, because I don't think a digital badge is any different. In fact, in many respects, it's carries more validity than what a printed certificate would do. But so I guess the question I'm playing with is, how do we take forward the perceptions of the student audience around digital badging? Yeah. Not that I have answers. It's kind of just an open question, throwing ideas around. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is really interesting. A friend of mine who's running a badge project at ANU, we were talking about diplomas, and she made the rather astute observation that really those objects are mute objects, in that all the information that's there is just what's printed on them, and you haven't got, it's not dynamic. It doesn't link back to anything. It doesn't link back to the issuer. It doesn't link back to the earner. It doesn't link back to or it doesn't include all of the criteria. It's just a piece of paper. So she called it a mute object, whereas the other one almost speaks to you. But it is interesting, that perception, and I think that is part of the. I think when you look at some of the Open Badges community calls, people talk about the fact that there's this new trust network that needs to be established. But part of that trust that needs to be built is actually with the earners, and not even so much thinking ahead to potential employers, etc., but more to the people who are actually going to be earning the badges. Anyone else got thoughts on that?
I was just going to say that we did plan into the trials that we'd get some feedback from students. So I think that there is going to be that chicken and the egg thing. Is that, do you set the system up so that people can have badges before that they're accepted, or do you have to wait till they're accepted and then kind of rush through a whole badging infrastructure to meet the demand? So I'm actually finding it really interesting to be in this space, because I think badges is so new and so kind of beta that all those things actually aren't solved yet. There is no solution that's kind of, this is the way to do it, this is the software to do it with, this is the process to go through. I think a lot of it is just finding your way through these. So I think Wayne's kind of really put on a big thing, is that I don't know if students are ready for badges at the moment. And that's kind of why I think when the big kind of companies that recognize learning and that recognize or display people's resumes and those kind of profile systems are built to accept badges, then I think that kind of the curve will kind of only go up at that point. We'll be able to kind of reach a critical mass quite rapidly. It's just kind of waiting to get to that point at the moment, I think. But I kind of think if we have to keep pushing, we have to keep showing that there is value in these things. And I think that digital validation side of things is really interesting, because it just beats paper. Because technically, if I find someone's Harvard graduate, their testama, within a couple of hours with Photoshop, I'm sure I could mock up a pretty reasonable fake version of it. I can put that in my resume, but who's to verify that or not? And I think badges are to
Did Tim break up there?
Yeah, I think he did break up. So
I was just going to add something on that. I think there's a couple of things in both what Wayne and Tim have commented. I worked with a badging system, wasn't open badges, with a teacher professional space in the Plain community. And, if I'd asked those 8,000 teachers beforehand, would you like to earn badges in this community for the work you do, I'd probably get 20% would be interested. However, having had the experience of earning badges, we got a very different answer. And I think students are in the same position. They might be answering for something they don't really understand. And so I think we have to hold that thought and hold that in mind. And I think Tim's right. We have to pilot some small-scale activity to look at the value of it, how sustainable it is across a course, across a degree, across an institution. and how worthy it is for the learner to take elsewhere. But I don't think there's any service done by not exploring it because students aren't interested. I don't think students quite understand any more than academics who are researching this at the moment what is meant by badges.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's that way with lots of things. When a few years ago, when I mean, if you think back to a decade ago or something, people were still very skeptical about things like ebooks, etc., and nobody wanted to read an ebook. And now the ebook is rapidly outpacing regular books. So I think you're right. And again, it goes to that whole trust thing. People have to start trusting it. People have to start seeing it as a part of the environment. And I actually wonder whether part of the Mozilla strategy has actually been to actually aim at a younger generation. Many of the projects that they do are that K through 12. Bron and I both sat in on a midnight call about cities of learning this week, and all of those cities of learning projects were very much out of all of the 4 that we heard from. Only one of them had a workforce development side to it, so that aimed at older people, and I think that only went up to 24. So I wonder whether they're aiming at a younger generation, thinking, we're not going to capture this older generation because, the concept of badges is so closely linked with, games, with scouting, with, stickers. Like, this is what I heard all the time. It's like, oh, it's just a smiley sticker, beneath it. When actually, I think what projects like CSU and ANU prove is that it can actually be so much more, and it can be so much bigger. Really capturing someone's competencies.
Well, by the time you get to university, you already understand the system of grades and assessment and accreditation. So you already know how to play that game. So you're asking them to now engage in a different game to the one they already know, and I think that's unsettling for anybody. But as you say, children, and the reason they're looking at it so much with kids is because it's an equity issue. There's so much happening in kids' lives outside of formal education, and they're not getting recognition for it in the formal system. And so it's a way to articulate learning that's happening around the school back into the school. And vice versa, and maybe that's something academic institutions should be looking more about. Not that it's about their badges, but maybe it's about badges coming from elsewhere into the academic institution as well.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned that last time as well, which is that if as an institution you're looking at badges out, then you also need to be looking at badges in. Is that actually something that you guys are looking at, Tim? And just a follow-up question from that as well is Richard Jones, who's in the Etherpad chat, just said, what about the market? Is the market ready? Would you rock up to an interview with an iPad full of badges? And I guess the question is, what would the employer say if he said, oh, here's a link to my backpack? So is that part of your trial as well, Tim?
We haven't got anything explicit about badges in at the moment and recognising badges. I mean, that at the moment for the university we have a whole accreditation system to recognise prior learning, so that's taking care of that side of things. I kind of think in terms of the turning up to the resume or turning up to the interview with badges, I think it actually probably depends what the badge is saying. If you're saying that for this interview that you're a good, you need oral communication and you need to be able to do this and you need to be proficient at this software, actually having a badge with the institution's kind of branding on it, actually saying that yes, you've achieved a level of competency, I think actually that might matter quite a bit in terms of someone that just says, well, I graduated with a degree in graphic arts or something like that. Whereas if you're saying the specificity of what it is that you actually got accreditation for, I think all of a sudden it does become meaning, and employers can quite quickly see what that meaning and value is. So I'm not sure whether we're quite there yet. I think there's still that level of acceptance that needs to happen, but I think it's those value propositions that can really make a difference for badges into the longer term.
Sorry, I'm just trying to follow up on what's happening on the Ether as well as trying to follow the conversation in here. I'm just aware that we've only got another 10 minutes left, and so probably time for maybe one or two last questions or comments. And just to refer people as well to the fact that there is another OBANZ call next week. So just for those people who might pop out early, there is another OBANZ call next week where we'll have time to talk about other things. So one of the people that contacted us in the lead up to this, and it was actually I've had two people contact me yesterday and today who were both saying, look, we're ready to do an Open Badges project, but where do we start? You know, like where do we even start? Best place to start, your badge design system or or choosing your tech. What would you say, Tim?
I think you can go to do 90% of the work with paper. The technology kind of comes in as this is the way of providing those features, but I think you really just need a bit of paper and some common sense. I think we nutted out most of the system things just in a couple of conversations, throwing out some kind of tables and some spreadsheet kind of ideas around how do all these things align. But I think most of it's pretty low tech, and I think there's some really good, I've seen some really good templates online that are just PDF things which you kind of fill in. It's got all the bits of metadata that you will add into the technology down the line, but it basically gets you to fill in everything prior to actually working out what the technology.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Having run a few badge design workshops now, like that's all on paper. You know, I do add in a little bit about, you know, here are some tools online for actually, you know, physically or for actually digitally creating them, but most of the thinking all has to happen up front. Just a little bit from just from the chat that's happening in here. Richard, you mentioned that I'm just finishing a digital media course on Coursera, which probably has more value than a badge. Well, I think what's interesting is that people do conflate kind of, you know, doing the actual learning experience with earning the badge. And in fact, I think, you know, the badge is the sign. It is the certificate that shows that you actually did that. But yeah, so I think the two things are slightly different in that, you know, the badge actually shows that you did this, and so it's, in a way it's just different from the certificate that Coursera would send you. But the fact is that when Coursera sends you the, hey, you've achieved this, basically you'll get it as a PDF or as an email, and then you'll list it on your CV. But I can list that on my CV now, you know, and even though I didn't do that course, and if I send it to an employer, they're going to have to follow up, and it's actually quite difficult for them to follow that digital paper trail. Whereas if it's a badge and it actually links back, then it's certified. So I think that's kind of where, you know, where the badges have a bit of a step up from just getting a certificate. I'll just because we're supposed to be wrapping up, I'll just see if there's anyone else here on the panel that's got some other questions or comments.
I have a question, but it's kind of it's a small one, but it was a big one when I was working in designing a badging system. We found our graphic artists were really great at designing icons, but really couldn't come up with the concept of a badge, and it's quite different. Did you have any issues with the graphics people in working through this? Because I know in academic institutions we're really good at putting icons into our web work or our printed materials or whatever else. The badges really they sit more on the marketing side of things, don't they, than on the instructional design side?
Yeah, we actually brought marketing in to actually liaise with the design process, mainly because it is like their speciality is the visualization things, and that's when the whole idea of the framework really comes into play, because basically what they're trying to do with the badge is visualize what your framework is trying to say. So it actually makes the design process a lot easier if you can actually tell them the requirements that you need the badge to communicate. So what is the, you know, it needs to show that there's a hierarchy. It needs to show what the value is. It needs to clearly articulate what it's for. Those kind of things are quite, simple, but they're the kinds of things that a designer kind of needs to really meet your requirements. So I think having that framework is really important to that final design process, and really just simplifies it and expedites it quite a lot, because the turnaround time on those designs was quite quick. But also I think since we first started looking, there's a lot of people that have actually opened up and put up all their systems that they've developed. So things like Purdue and Educourse and a few others have actually put up their badging system so that you can actually see how they've structured things. That was a really good help for us as well, in terms of just getting some ideas about how they've structured and designed that for consistency, so that you knew immediately that this was an Educourse badge.
All right, so then my last question is, can you please put the links up to where we can find those? If you could just put them in the Etherpad, because I think that's probably really helpful for people to kind of see other badge systems and how they've been designed. So that would be really great. Natalie, any other questions from you? Nope, Nat may have just stepped off. So in that case, I'm just gonna wrap it up. Ron, anything else from you?
Oh, sorry, I was typing away there. When I speak, I miss the bit of information that I was going into the notes. No, I think it's great. I think we need to hear more cases, and if you've got more nitty-gritty of what you've done or any of the templates or work you can share with us, or Tim, if you want to drop any suggested templates or places people should go to start working on this. I think, as you say, it's that design work and that homework that you need to do first that will serve you well. It's like any design project. It's the time you spend up front before you come to the actualization that will save you a lot of grey hair down the end. And thanks, it's been great.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, everyone, we've got another call next Wednesday, which will be an open space call. So anyone's got topics or things that they would like to discuss at that, we're happy to take anyone on in the panel and to just have fun, open discussion. So you can put that in this Etherpad just at the bottom, or otherwise you can just tweet myself or Bron or the OBANZ Twitter handle, which is OB_ANZ, sometime during the week, and we'd be happy to have you in there. We're working on setting up the blog. We've got the domain name, so that'll be coming pretty quickly. And the other thing that I then just need to say, I think, is that, yeah, we've tried to capture most of the things here. The previous sessions are still online. You can just view them either on our YouTube channel, or you can view them on the Google Plus page. We've got a Facebook page as well if you prefer to get your updates from there. And other than that, it'll be the same time next week. We'd also love to hear from some New Zealand projects. So if you know of any New Zealand projects, because this is the OBANZ community for Australia and New Zealand, if you know of any New Zealand projects, then we'd love to hear from you. So with that, I'll just say thank you to Tim for speaking and sharing their project. Thank you to Bron for helping me facilitate, and thanks to Natalie and to Wayne for coming into the panel and adding their questions. So thanks everyone, and we will see you next week.
Bye everyone.
Bye everyone.
Yeah.